Hey, what's going on, guys? Good afternoon. Hope you are doing well as usual. For anyone new to this channel, earlier this year, I started reviewing all of the games in the East series. Over the course of reviewing all of these games and playing through them, this has become one of my favorite game franchises probably ever. And it's for the simple reason that I've never really seen a video game series juggle all of the things I like all at once. You got the tightly paced, reflex-based action and the boss fights, and not to mention some of the best game music I've ever heard composed. It is amazing. I really wish I played these games earlier in life, but it's not too late for me. Well, there's still plenty of time. Let's jump back into the marathon with one of the highest rated games in the East series, The Oath in Felghana. For a little backstory, Oath in Felghana is a remake of the original East 3. After East 2, for some reason Falcom made this one into a side-scroller instead of the usual overhead style which we saw before. It's similar to Zelda 2. You take your game series, you flip the genre, and you get mixed results. Some people liked East 3, some don't. I haven't played it myself yet, so can't speak of that, but I suppose the reception was bad enough to warrant a remake on the mighty PSP quite a lot of time later. It took the story of 3, but threw it in the Arc of Napishtim engine. If you ask me, that's a recipe for greatness, and what we got was just that. Before we begin, you guys know the drill. This will be a spoiler-free review, unless stated otherwise. But let's start with the introduction of this game. Ys, The Oath in Felghana begins with our familiar duo of Adol and Dogi docking their boat in the land of, well, Felghana, which is our pal Dogi's hometown. Something is off, however, as monsters can be heard off in the distance, preying on a young woman. That is before Adol runs in and swings his sword around like a madman and kills everything in sight. And we all head back to the town of Redmont to, I guess, reminisce. Dogi doesn't stay long as he leaves up into the Eldurm Mountains to go see his old master, while Adol decides to stay in town. But soon enough, he finds the townsfolk in quite a panic as the mayor of Redmont is trapped inside of the local quarry. They all ask Adol to head down there and go check it out, and that's where we start the game. The story won't take up quite as much time in this review as before. I'll still obviously cover it because I like talking about East stories, but Oath in Felghana is like most East games, where the gameplay gets a lot of the focus, and this one in particular is probably the most action-based East game we've covered so far. It's more non-linear than the others, so you don't get quite as much exploration here, and you certainly don't get as much story as the likes of 8. The high difficulty, which we'll get into a lot more later, also means more time spent in the action, learning, and restarting. If you just want to get into the combat and cut out most of the backtracking, the exploration, and the story, this is your game. The overworld is by far the smallest we've seen yet, and not usually much to see off the beaten path. A bit of a bummer to me, but once again, I see what they're going for here. The dungeons have quite a bit more substance to them, although, let's be clear here, they're still relatively straightforward. You're not going to find a Solomon Shrine in this game. Adol himself starts out very limited in what he can actually do. You got your sword, and you got a boost mode that lets him attack much faster, and you can take less damage, but that's it. Over time, you do power up a little. You can upgrade to a double jump, and in the PSP version, you can upgrade your boost to last a lot longer and actually heal you a little. But the most important items you will find are these magic bracelets that will directly aid you in battle. There's a fireball attack, which I didn't really use very often except to cheese. There's a wind attack that is quite handy to finish off a combo, or get some extra airtime if you're trying to dodge an attack. And finally, there is the Terra Bracelet, which might be my favorite of them all. It's a godsend for boss fights, because it makes you invulnerable to damage for a couple of seconds. You better make sure to make use of this as much as possible, as it saved my ass many times. Not to mention, you can also harness a fraction of Dogi's power level to smash rookie level walls. Still can't beat the boss man though. There he goes, smashing more fucking walls. Goddamn lunatic. It's up to you whether you actually want to use these bracelets at all. There are very few times where they're actually required to advance the game, but if used properly, these will help out a bunch. And on higher difficulties, you will certainly want to master these. Because after this, there aren't really many other items to help you. The most notable thing is the lack of healing items this time around. Sure, some enemies will drop some health pickups occasionally, but on a boss fight, you don't get shit. You see that life bar over there? That's all you're getting. So you better get good, or go home and be a goddamn family man. I almost did go home and be a family man at one point, I'll be honest. This game won't pamper you, it won't give you any break. You die on a dungeon, you go back to that checkpoint from 20 minutes ago and you deal with it. You get low on HP on a boss battle, you better start dodging or you're gonna die. There's no jumping in the menu and eating a goddamn mango or swapping characters. It's add-all and add-all only. You didn't pack any snacks or potions either. I'll say this now because I'm sure you're already suspecting this. Oath in Felghana can be hard. I first played this game on normal, and it was tricky at times. But my second playthrough was on Nightmare, which is what you're seeing now. Nightmare mode is crazy difficult. The hardest East game I've played thus far, and it's not even remotely close. It's one of the toughest games I've played in a long time, in fact. The problem is the gap in the difficulty is all over the place. I mean, sure, the dungeon checkpoints can be kind of annoying and spread out far between each other, but if you play it safe and you wait for a good time to attack enemies and you level up, you probably won't die very often. And if you do get low on health, you can warp out and just save your progress. But once you step foot in the boss arena, your whole world just comes crashing down as your ass gets kicked over and over and over and over again. Sometimes for me, like 2 hours or more. I'm an incredibly stubborn gamer. I hate giving up and grinding for levels because it kind of feels like I cheated. But this game made me change my ways. After I spent 4 hours trying to beat one guy, I just wasn't good enough to beat him. This guy was just insane because you can't attack him whenever. He has this weak point which will open up at random, and sometimes you'll be waiting what feels like minutes just to even have a window to attack. When you are able to go in, he drops these goddamn bombs, and they're near impossible to dodge sometimes. It all depends on how many he decides to drop. I did hate that one boss fight. It didn't feel entirely fair, and, it also embarrassingly took me 4 hours. But most of these fights are really good, and probably the highlight of the entire game for me. I was surprised how motivated I was to actually beat these tough boss fights. I never wanted to give up or go take a break. And sure, it's frustrating to get your ass beat over and over again, but it's the good, non-bullshit kind of anger. It's the anger that translates into pure hype and happiness once you actually pull off the impossible. When I beat the second fight with Chester, it was such a close call and I thought I was gonna lose. When I dodged all of those attacks and dealt the finishing blow, my god, I practically flew off the couch. I really don't think I've ever gotten so riled up playing a game than I did when beating some of these tough-ass boss fights. And that's the magic of a hard but mostly fair game. Alright, with that said, I would not recommend trying Nightmare on a first playthrough unless you are really hardcore. I'm not great at these kind of games, but I think anyone would struggle big time without any prior experience. If you're brave, try hard mode. If you're clinically insane, go ahead and do Nightmare. I'm not going to stop you. Alright, before we dabble in the spoilers for Ys the Oath in Felghana, let's take a breather and listen to that soundtrack a bit. It's obviously amazing. It's recomposed from the original Ys 3. I haven't listened to the original tunes, but I know these are headbangers. So let's listen. Alright, now we are going to talk a bit about the plot and the ending. Like I said earlier, we won't go too much into detail. I'm also going to restructure the story segments back into just assuming that you've played the game. So more opinion and less explaining. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, you should probably just play the game and not spoil yourself. Alright, right off the bat, Chester is the best part about the story, without a doubt. He starts out pretty evil, but he's got good backstory, and his reasons are at least understandable, even though they are wrong. He's on a revenge arc to kill this guy named Count McGuire, who is the person responsible for the slaughtering of his village, although the methods of going about this revenge are kind of questionable, as he even stabs Dogi just to get some statues. So, yeah, a bit of a dick. Chester comes around eventually, though. He finds out he was just used as a pawn for the real villain to come in and take the statues, and use them to summon Galbalan. So Chester hands us the sword of his ancestor, Genos, the only guy to beat Galbalan, and he's officially incorporated as one of the boys. Chester and Elena also have a pretty nice dynamic, which is also a highlight of the story for me. Of course, Chester pretends not to care about her anymore, but we all know that's not true. Dogi is also in this game, and he has a bigger role than usual, as this is his hometown. So he's got plenty of connections with the cast, and learning about his past and how he ties in with the other characters was pretty cool. After this, we don't get much more Dogi lore, so enjoy it while it lasts. The rest of the characters are mostly just there. Better than your regular town NPC, but forgettable. One of these NPCs actually turns out to be the big villain. That's the twist. Bishop Nicholas is the bad guy instead of Count McGuire. And this dude's pretty lame, but he's got a good voice, I will admit that.
Her faith was not strong enough. And in the end, only those who truly believe in the new god shall remain. But I am all he shall ever need. My body and soul I give to him in the ritual grounds at Ilburns.
And he even does the Jeb Bush pose. You see that right there? But, alright, when the most memorable thing about you is being compared to Jeb Bush, that's probably not a good thing. I mentioned voice there, as there's a fully voiced cast of characters. Even the most minor characters have voice actors behind them. And they're good. Really good, in my opinion.
I left town because I found the menial existence offered me there to be utterly repugnant. I wasn't thrilled at the prospect of babysitting you for the rest of my life, either, Eleanor.
Did I ever mention that Dogi sounds like a younger Joe from Family Guy? I was half convinced he was gonna belt out a Peter instead of Adol.
Well, Adol, here we are. This is Felghana.
So, at the end of Oath in Felghana, of course, the bad dude succeeds in resurrecting the big civilization-ending evil force, this time in the form of Galbalan, but you know Adol is there to intercept, and the final battle begins.
I am the Alpha and the
such fragile creature. You shall know my power well.
Oh boy, did I know his power well. Galbalan is a learning experience. There's a lot of practice that goes into each phase of the fight, as they're so different. Phase 1 isn't so bad once you figure out what to do, but Phase 2 is one of the most brutal boss sections I've seen in a while. Some of these attacks feel almost impossible to avoid. Phase 3 is also pretty brutal, as Galbalan starts to get desperate, and he starts up a game of ping pong with you. You have to quickly bounce the orb back in time. Meanwhile, Galbalan tries to pull you into this vortex and destroy you. If you fall in, you'd better pray you have enough HP to survive it. Not to mention he's spraying bullets all over the screen. Meanwhile, simultaneously, you have to play ping pong with him, so it's pretty tricky. After almost 3 hours of attempts, I finally did it. And oh boy, did I go absolutely nuts. I was jumping up and down. Seriously. Galbalan is only stunned momentarily, so Chester decides to sacrifice his life and blow up Genos Island and Galbalan. And my man Chester, he finally redeems himself. Adol returns to town, but he can never stay in one place. And come on, I mean, peace to Adol is like mice in mothballs. So he leaves the town of Redmont for the next East adventure. Dogi stays behind to help out his folks, but Elena at least waves us off, so thanks. And that concludes Ys, the Oath in Felghana. A pretty solid ending and conclusion, but I'll be honest, I was hardly paying attention because I was still celebrating what was one of the most difficult games I'd played in a while. Alright, it's time to bring this review to a close. Does Oath in Felghana have any problems? Not many, but like any game, it is flawed. The dungeon checkpoints suck. I don't know if it's because I'm on Nightmare or the PC version, but when I first played this game on the PSP, if you died, you spawned right in the room you died in, which is too easy. But respawning at the start of the dungeon that took a half hour to climb through, that sucks big time. I mean, couldn't they let us keep some of our progress at least? We can warp out any time, but if you aren't paying attention or are too slow to hit the inventory button, you could lose all your dungeon progress. It's a minor complaint, as some of the dungeons do have midpoints. Others don't though, and that does suck. The boss battles are of course excellent, but some have some RNG elements that I'm not a big fan of, and certain attacks feel pretty much impossible to avoid. Even my favorite fight in the game against Galbalan has this issue, and that can be frustrating for the wrong reasons. But 95% of the time, it's a fair game. This is a nitpick that most Ys games have. I just wish there is more side content. What's worse is that there's stuff that's easily missable. You'll have to stumble into random areas or talk to random people at specific times to get it to trigger. That's about it for all my complaints though. This is a really polished game with few issues, and it is one of the best Ys games. I was contemplating whether I like this one more than 7 or not. Maybe it will overtake it one day, but for now I slightly prefer the amount of content and the general craziness of 7 a bit more. And of course 8 is still at the top, but I gotta give this one 3rd place. The insane boss fights and the challenge level on Nightmare, I think propelled this a little bit more than Ys 1 and 2. If I played it on normal again, 1 and 2 might be a tad higher, but the hypest gaming moments I think I've ever had came from this game, and those will be long-lasting memories. So with that said, I'll tie this with Ys 7 at a solid 8.5 score. Try this game out right now. Just make sure to pick the correct difficulty level for you, otherwise you might be in trouble. Anyway, that'll do it for today's episode, guys. I'll see you soon with the next Ys game. I'll either do Memories of Celceta, maybe Ys 9. I haven't really decided yet, but thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.